Hi guys, today we will talk about immunization in the elderly and the importance it has had in the reduction of mortality from infectious diseases in this specific age group. Vaccination has been chosen as the most efficient measure to prevent infectious diseases globally. The severity and incidence of infections increases proportionality to age, so that older adults are an important target population in the vaccination. First, we will mention the preventable diseases in the elderly by immunization, including its epidemiology. Then, we will go to define a very important concept in this topic known as immunosenescence. Then, we will explain the vaccination scheme in the elderly and an overview from each vaccine. At the end, information about the cost effectiveness of immunization in Mexico and frequent associated comorbidities or cases in which such vaccines are contraindicated. This waiting to make elderly population aware of the importance of vaccination through the current evidence and statistics on the subject. Due to its relevance and magnitude, the pneumonias for influenza and pneumococcus have been ranked first, followed by the diseases caused by herpes zoster, and the last one caused by Clostridium tetani. The influenza is one of the diseases with the greatest impact on the public health because the mutagenic power of the agent, which make it a non-eradicable virus with the current technological tools, but susceptible to be controlled through the annual vaccination of the population. This infection has a seasonal pattern with peaks during the winter season. It has been categorized as the main cause of the seasonal epidemics and all human pandemics. This virus is transmitted by salivary and respiratory secretions. It's usually self-limiting, but recent studies have shown increases in complications and mortality in the elderly population due to the lack of vaccination. The most common worldwide cause of pneumonia is pneumococcus, which can also cause meningitis, sinusitis, and media otitis. It affects especially in the extremes of life, and more if there are basic comorbidities. It is even possible that these microorganisms are associated. In fact, an observational study conducted in the United States for 31 years concluded that 90% of the annual deaths due to influenza had been among the elderly. Recently, the United Nations organization published statistics on demographic changes, indicating the obvious rise of the geriatric population. At the beginning of the 1990s, it constituted 9.2% of the total, and in 2013, it reached 11.7%. Estimates indicate that by 2050, almost a quarter of the world's population will be older adults. This demographic change results in a greater number of geriatric population that demands health services due to the immunosenescence. the comorbidity and the physiological fragility that makes it more vulnerable to diverse conditions of acute illness, in particular of infectious origin. Herpes zoster is a neurocutaneous disease, product of the reactivation and replication of the varicella zoster virus, caused by the decrease of the immunological competence of individuals. It affects more than anything people who had a previous wild infection, where the virus remained dormant in the sensitive ganglia. The virus expands through the nerve fibers to the dermatomes, generating skin manifestations, pain, and neuronal damage. So the main sequel is neuralgia in the geriatric patient. Tetanus is a disease characterized by a muscular neuroparalysis due to dysfunction of the central nervous system during infection by Clostridium tetani. Upon entering the host, it releases a neurotoxin that crosses the nerve fiber and causes a progressive overstimulation of the motor neurons to the sensory and autonomic neurons. The life expectancy worldwide has been prolonged due to the improvement in hygiene and medical progress. The statistics that we mentioned earlier by the Organization of the United Nations of the demographic figures expected in 2050 have been the basis for the immune system to respond to this demographic transition, which has aroused the interest of the experts and led to many investigations, generating a concept of immunosenescence, defined as the dysfunction of the immune system that develops as a consequence of the affection of the cells of this system, with a decrease in cells regeneration and the potential differentiation of the precursor cells as age advances. All this occurs in a continuous pro-inflammatory environment, in addition to the activation of molecular patterns associated with molecular damage, which is called inflammaging. Both innate and acquired immunity decrease with aging, which explains the greater morbidity and mortality due to infectious diseases in the elderly population. Now, we are gonna talk about the vaccination scheme of the elderly, where we can divide it by the vaccine's name, the main diseases that can be prevented with the application of this vaccine, the dose, and the age of application. First of all, we have the TD vaccine that prevents from tetanus and diphtheria. It's applied in 2 doses from 4 to 8 weeks of interval, and it's mainly used in people of 60 years or more. Also, the TD has a reinforcement and it's applied every 5 or 10 years. Secondly, we have the antipneumonical that prevents from pneumococcus pneumoniae. It's applied in 1 dose in people of 60 years and more, and also has a reinforcement that can be applied every 5 years. And last, we have the anti-influenza that prevents the influenza. It's applied once per year in people of 60 years and more. Now, let's talk about some specifications from every vaccine, starting with the TD vaccine. About this vaccine, it's important that prevents tetanus, a disease caused by a bacteria that makes painful contractions and rigidity in all the body that can lead to death. Prevents diphtheria, a disease caused also by a bacteria. This disease leads to the formation of a crust in the backside part of the tongue that, if it breaks, can lead to a mortal bleeding. The bacteria involved are the Corynebacterium diphtheria and the Clostridium tetani. talking about the anti-pneumonical vaccine, we have that prevents pneumonia, an infection of the lungs caused by a bacteria, the Streptococcus pneumoniae. The vaccine is composed of 23 types of these bacteria that are the main types causing the infection. Every year, this vaccine prevents around 5,000 possible cases of pneumonia. And last, we have the anti-influenza vaccine. This one prevents influenza, a disease caused by a virus that leads to high fever and flu-like symptoms. There are more of 100 subtypes of viruses that cause influenza, but the most common are the AH1N1, AH3N2, and some B types. These are included on this vaccine. This is the most accessible vaccine and the most requested.
Infectious diseases are an important cause of morbidity and mortality in individuals older than 60 years old. It has been suggested that in order to compete with infectious diseases, preventable track vaccination it requires a program of vaccination throughout life. The mistake in the administration of the vaccines that often occurs during the adulthood has a dramatic impact on health in age advance, especially in individuals who do not receive any vaccine. One of the clearest examples of the benefits of vaccination in adults and elderly adults is the vaccine against influenza, which decreases mortality from all causes in 48 to 50% of the elderly. Vaccinations also reduce complications and hospitalizations due to influenza or pneumonia up to 27%. Among the sociocultural aspects, the influence of medical recommendation on self-perception of health status to influence vaccination is highlighted. Observation of a high probability of incomplete schemes or lack of vaccine in elderly adults who need difficult to leave home suggests the need to design strategies that make them more accessible. Stimulate the cultivation of vaccination in places of assembly and use. Family vaccination approach through innovative strategies of promotion and education for health. It also suggests the need to emphasize the vaccinations of people with some chronic deteriorations in health and schedule targeted vaccinations, while increasing the offer of universal vaccination in health service, asylums, religion congregations, and others. Based on data from the National Health and Nutrition Survey, ENSANUT, elderly adults represent about 9.2% of the populations of the country. The attention to the health of the elderly adults requires action integrals for the prevention, detection, and treatment of diseases, such as the incorporation of vaccinations in the attention to the health of this population group. The results of the ENSANUT indicate that the percent elderly adult nationals who report receiving the pneumococcal vaccine, anti-tetanus, and anti-influenza was here among affiliates Mexican Social Security Institute and the Protection System Social Health, and minor among those who report not have health protections. The coverage of the three vaccines was much higher in rural areas compared with the urban ones. This may be the result of large government efforts and health policies implemented to expand the coverage of essential services in rural areas and difficult to access. When coverage has been studied by population groups, it has been consistently found great coverage in women, while adults over 75 years showed less coverage. A very important aspect related to the safety of vaccine is to know the contraindication of each vaccine to avoid situations that may put the patient at risk. The professional who administers the vaccines is responsible for knowing the current contraindication in the country in which he practices. It will be verified if the patient has temporary or permanent contraindication to be vaccinated. Although there are few contraindications to the application of a vaccine in certain circumstances, its application increases the risk of causing a serious reaction. Contraindications are related to particular situations of the recipient of the vaccine and not with the vaccine itself. For example, the vaccine against the influenza that is traditionally produced in egg and so contraindicated in people with a history of several allergic reactions to egg protein. The permanent contraindications are severe allergy in front of same component of the vaccine or after a previous dose, and several immune defenses. And the temporary contraindication allow the administration of a vaccine once resolved. The most common examples are immunosuppression and any mother and several diseases with or without fever. The detrimental effects of agents on vaccinations will increase in importance as a public health concern in the 21st century. Despite the relative and paucity of vaccine study in the elderly, general agreement exists that the immune response in the elderly is blunt and efficacy is low compared to healthy young adults for most vaccine tests. We have discussed some of the immunoperturbations that can be attributed to immunosciences. It is clear that immune defects need to be better treated and that overcome with next generation vaccines.